Good morning and welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council's weekly online briefing for faith leaders. Today's program is San Francisco Religious Leaders Reflect on Where We Have Been, What We Have Learned, and Where We Are Going. Thank you for your support. This program would not be possible without generous funding from congregations, corporations, faith-based social service agencies, foundations, judicatories, and supporters like you. Help us spread the word. Visit sfinterfaithcouncil.org to learn about SFIC programming and how to become a supporter. Follow SFIC on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to SFIC's YouTube channel to watch all of our previous virtual events. A bit of housekeeping. Today's program is being recorded. For audio and video, all participants are muted and without video to minimize distraction. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. They will be shared with the speakers after the meeting for response. To activate closed captions, select the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and click Enable Live Transcriptions. SF is open. Thanks to San Francisco's successful COVID-19 vaccine rollout and decreasing COVID positive cases, the city is aligning with state guidance that removes nearly all local COVID-related restrictions. Protect yourself, your family, and your community by getting vaccinated, staying home if you're sick, and maximizing fresh air. Get vaccinated, San Francisco. Drop-ins for COVID-19 vaccines are now available citywide. No appointment needed. The Pfizer vaccine is available for ages 12 and up at San Francisco Zuckerberg General Hospital and Southeast Healthcare Center. Moderna is available for those 18 and up at Maxine Hall. And you can visit sf.gov/get-vaccinated for more information about all of the vaccination sites. Now is the time to come together, San Francisco, because together we can stop Asian discrimination, bias, hate, and violence. The COVID-19 virus has no race or nationality. It is simply a disease. To report a hate crime, call the SFPD at 415-553-1133. And at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trey, and thank you for stepping in to be our new tech consultant. As many of you know, the long-standing programming we've done with the City and County of San Francisco has come to an end, and that's a good sign. However, today I was very pleased to see that the entire staff of those who have assisted us in the past have joined to support Trey in this first transitional meeting. So we thank Elisa and John and Hafisa and Sharon Walton for being with us today. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this week's online briefing for faith leaders. As our city and state emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic and ease conditioned public health precautions, we find ourselves at a profound and reflective moment. This week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council, welcomes a diverse group of religious leaders who will share their personal and pastoral experiences of this unprecedented time, lessons learned, and how they are beginning to envision a new normal for their communities of faith. And at this time, I'd like to introduce a person who needs no introduction, the founder and past chair of the San Francisco Interfaith Council and matriarch of Interfaith in San Francisco, the Venerable Rita R. Semel, who will offer some words of welcome on behalf of the Board of Directors, as well as the Interfaith Statement that the San Francisco Interfaith Council reads before every gathering. Rita, welcome. Good morning. It's wonderful to see you.
Good morning. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here and to see so many wonderful faces friends of long-standing and new friends. I'm welcoming all of you on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council Board of Directors. And in doing so, I'd like to read the following statement, which we read at every meeting. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this meeting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. Oh,
Call from the wireless call.
I'm sorry, that's my daughter.
Call from the wireless call.
I'll be right back.
A busy lady.
Sorry, I'm on the phone. I'm on a meeting, honey. I'll talk to you
Oh, I
later.
forgot, Mom. It's my fault. I'll talk to you later.
I have a very devoted daughter. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah, you can't apologize for that, Rita.
So I'm not apologizing. I'm blessed. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other, that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Rita, always. It is said that part of leadership and success is showing up. The person that I've asked to offer the reflective moment today not only shows up, but brings her entire self with her, her faith and deep conviction. I've been blessed over the course of these 14 years to come to know and respect Tova Green of the San Francisco Zen Center. And we have asked Tova if she would ground us in a reflective moment this morning. Welcome, Tova, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michael, for inviting me. Good morning, everyone. I'm speaking to you this morning from Beginner's Mind Temple, the name of San Francisco Zen Center's city center. And I'd like to invite you to enjoy a moment of silence, to notice our breathing and settle into our bodies so that we may be fully present for this morning's program. So I'm going to ring a bell to invite you to really tune in to your breath and feel your feet on the floor and take a moment to arrive fully. And then I will share some words. It's amazing how sometimes just a few breaths and a moment of centering in the body can refresh us. So I hope that happened for you. I want to share some words about beginner's mind and how that can assist us at times of transition as we're in right now. Our founder, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, spoke about beginner's mind, the mind that is open, inclusive, ready to meet each moment and each activity in a fresh, unbiased way. He also said beginner's mind is the mind of compassion. As we breathe deeply, we may feel both the many losses of the pandemic year we have lived through and gratitude for these moments of beginning again. Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." I think most of us have been trained to come up with answers rather than questions, and to take pride in all that we know. And that's valuable. And yet to be able to face not knowing is also valuable. This year we have seen how much is unknown and uncertain. So as we look ahead and revision, may we draw strength, creativity, and compassion from our beginner's mind. So again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Tova, for grounding us in what promises to be a wonderful conversation. And I have a lot of questions drawing upon your wonderful reflection. This morning, we have assembled 6 prominent religious leaders in San Francisco, 4 of whom head up what we call judicatories. And a judicatory is, I would say, an umbrella organization, if you will, or a faith community. And these individuals are responsible for a number of faith communities throughout San Francisco. 2 of our guests today also have distinct faith communities and have had unique challenges throughout the pandemic. So what we've asked today is we will have 2 sets of questions. The first set of questions to our honored guests will be the considerations they made. We're going to ask them to speak to the particularities of the constituencies they serve, ethnic, racial makeup, geographical territory, etc. The particularities of the liturgical practices of their faith community and how they were impacted by the COVID-19. We're going to ask them to speak to the decision-making process that they led in shepherding their communities of faith through the pandemic, significant moments and concerns, and the impact of the pandemic on them personally, how it has changed them and their outlook, as well as lessons learned. We're going to begin with Rabbi Dan Ayne, the senior rabbi at Congregation Beth Shalom, which is a conservative congregation, which has had its own challenges. Rabbi Ayne, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. I just want to begin by thanking you, Michael, thanking Rita, and thanking the San Francisco Interfaith Council. I think it's safe to say that for everybody here on this call and the faith communities, we have relied on you very, very heavily over these past 18 months. You have been an anchor to our community. There isn't a meeting that goes by where somebody doesn't ask, well, what does the SF Interfaith Council recommend? And we've really appreciated that. So I just want to thank you and say I'm honored to be here. And as I mentioned before we started, I should not be going first. I am, I think, perhaps the most junior here. You have His Eminence, we have Reverend Current, you have the Archbishop, the retired Reverend Andrews, Imam Al-Amin. I don't think me going first is quite a humbling experience. I've only been here for 3 years. And if you think about the last 3 years, the first year and a half was me getting to know the city of San Francisco. And the next year and a half was me getting to know my bedroom. So it has been an unusual experience. The constituency at Congregation Beth Shalom is very, very diverse. Of course, we have a large group of people over 65 who have grown up in Congregation Beth Shalom. We're a 100-year-old institution in the Richmond district here in the city. And people count on us for a daily minyan, for Sabbath experiences, for life cycle events. We also have a large group of parents with school-aged children who had bar mitzvahs and other celebrations, which we had to figure out how to do in the midst of a pandemic And then perhaps most interestingly of the constituencies, what I have found is the millennial group has been flooding my inbox and our doors. I am getting weekly requests from millennials here in San Francisco who I think in light of COVID are asking some deeper spiritual existential questions and are coming to our community. And so we're beginning to serve a large group of people who are in their late 20s and early 30s and who are wondering, what is the type of life I want to have in light of the experience of the last month, a year and a half. Answering your questions in 3 minutes, Michael, I can't really, that's kind of a challenge. So I'll do my best to just cover a couple of quick issues. So first of all, the medium is the message. So that is sort of, I subscribe to Marshall McLuhan's, the medium is the message, and the medium of Judaism is the minyan. That's really the truth. The medium of Judaism is the minyan. A minyan is a gathering of 10 people together to share space, to breathe together, to pray together, to congregate together for the purpose of worshiping something larger than themselves. We believe as Jews that when we get a minyan together, that God's can be experienced in our midst. In fact, the first value that we have in our Torah, the first statement of value that comes in the book of Genesis is Lo tov heyot adam levado. It is not good for a person to be alone. And that was a statement that, especially as we approach Pride Weekend, we take very seriously. Our community has been on the forefront in LGBT issues. We were the first conservative congregation with a gay synagogue president, and we've always believed that people being alone is not good. So what do we do in the midst of a pandemic? How do we solve that problem? So for example, you need a minyan to recite the mourner's Kaddish, the blessing that one who has lost a loved one says in the year following their death. They come to gather in a minyan of 10 other people to mourn and to reflect and to consider the death of the loved one. We couldn't do that. We couldn't gather in that way. Getting together after someone loses a loved one is often followed by a shiva. The shiva is an open house. People bring food. The person doesn't say anything and the house is filled so that the person who is in mourning does not feel alone. We all congregate at a graveside to support the mourners, and we want to provide a regular place for people to be together. How do we do this? So you can imagine the complications that we had, and particularly the complications are how do we integrate technology into our practice in ways that can enhance the practice while at the same time not replace it. And I think what we did on the high holidays was, there's a lot of anxiety around the high holidays last September. And how are we going to congregate on Rosh Hashanah? How are we going to congregate on Yom Kippur? Could we? Would we have to cancel? Now, for example, 6 days out of the week, we have created online minyanim, which are prayer services for people to gather. We've done online classes, but yet there's something special about sharing the same space together on the high holidays. And of course, we don't want to use, we don't work on the Sabbath, and so we don't want to use a network on the Sabbath. So how do we maintain our desire to be offline for one day out of the week as well? And so what we did was we enhanced our rituals around the Sabbath. We created prayer groups that met online before sundown on Friday night, after sundown on Saturday night. And for the high holidays, we did a combination of pre-recorded services and services that were live before sundown. And then we found out new things about what technology can and can't do. We learned that what works in person doesn't necessarily work online. So whereas live we found is really important, when in person we found that recordings actually work better online. And so we were flooded with thousands of people who watched our pre-recorded Rosh Hashanah services because they could watch it at their will, and we were able to spread our message perhaps more widely than we otherwise would have. So as we continue to move forward, we have been trying out. So how have I been doing, Michael? I think you wanted to talk me personally. It's been really hard. It's been really hard. There is this sense, I think, and I'm curious to hear if the other faith leaders, people turn to leaders of faith And they want us to have answers. They want us to solve problems. And they put a lot of fear upon these communities. And I think us here on this group have had to hold a lot of that. I think we have had to hold that for our community, to hold the fear, to hold the anxiety, to not give easy answers, which I think in the first couple of months, there was a lot of pressure to give easy and simple answers. But I have been relying on our scriptures and our texts, which show that we have been, as Jewish people, through challenging experiences before, and that it is our deepest traditions in coming together as a community that has held us together. And so we've been eagerly looking forward to the moment when we can congregate again. And we've been thankful of the technology's ability to keep those interwoven webs of connection thriving to serve all of those who are looking to us anew in this new era. All right, was that 5 minutes or was that too long? Thanks, Michael.
You know, I once asked Reverend Brown to speak for 3 minutes, and he said it takes me that long to clear my throat. So I think you did just fine. Imam Abu Khadir Al-Amin, would you build on this? I know that you are in the outer mission. You serve a unique community, and that a big part of your coming together, if you will, is in person as well, especially for Friday afternoon prayers. Imam Abu Khadir, would you turn on your video? And I hope you found your voice, and please chime in. There he is.
Yes, thank you so much. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. With God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful Redeemer. I'm grateful to be on this call with all of the distinguished presenters, as well as Michael and Rita, our esteemed mother. And we appreciate the opportunity to share a few ideas regarding how we've experienced this pandemic. As you know, as Michael has said, part of our faith requires us to come together and make congregational prayers 5 times a day. And then on Fridays, we have a congregational prayer along with a sermon to encourage us to stay active and connected with one another. So we are, like the Rabbi Ayne mentioned, we have to have a certain number in order for our congregational service to be acceptable. And for us, part of God's mercy is the number that we have to have is only 3. So if 3 of us are together, then that forms a congregation for us. And when the pandemic first hit, we took advantage of Facebook and Zoom to stay connected with our community. And we encouraged people to have their congregational services in their homes with their families. So instead of feeling as though the restrictions diminished our connectiveness, we try to share with the community how this is really expansion. You know, even though we couldn't be in each other's presence, because we believe that God is everywhere and that he's omnipresent and that he hears all of us at the same time, and it's not confusing for him where it is for us. And we saw it as a part of God's mercy on us. Some of the challenges that we encountered were when we had deaths during the pandemic, that we had restrictions on who could come. And the important part of our duty to each other when one passes, we're to form a congregational prayer and pray for the forgiveness of that individual. So that was challenges because we believe that a certain number of people being present for the prayers also benefits that individual, because God considers the prayers of a certain number as securing one's place in paradise. We're also reminded with the pandemic of the brevity of life. We all only have a certain period of time that we're going to be here. We believe in life after this life. Death is not for us a final, but it's a step into the realm of the hereafter. So we've encouraged our congregants, which are very diverse. We have Muslims who are born here in the United States of the ethnicities of African American, European American, Latinos, as well as Asians. We have some Muslims who are from Indonesia, from the Philippines, some even as from some parts of Russia. So our congregation is very diverse, as well as having congregants that are from Africa, Northeast Africa, Sudanese, a few Libyans, and we feel enriched because the scripture ties us together. We also believe in the unseen. There are many things that are not seen that still have their effect upon us. So we're also, we've taken into consideration that for Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Allah said the whole earth is a place, a masjid, a mosque. He said the whole earth is a mosque. So though we know we need to have physical structures where we can come together and dedicate those for the purpose of worshiping God, when situations prevent us from doing so, part of God's mercy on us is that we can pray anywhere except the bathroom and the graveyard. We had the pleasure of praying at Moscone Center recently through the work of Hala Hijazi and some of the supervisors from the political arena, who made a place of prayer for Muslims who were getting their pandemic shots, their vaccinations. And so we're grateful and we're humble. We realize that we don't control things and that there's a mystery to life. One family that are members of the San Francisco Muslim Community Center, who no longer live in San Francisco, called me and let me know that the whole family had contracted the coronavirus. And the father of that family, because he had underlying health complications, he had a pacemaker, he was overweight, he also had a triple bypass. He was unfortunately he passed from the effects of the coronavirus, and it was very heavy on one of his daughters because she was the first one who was infected with the coronavirus, and she brought it home, and it hurt her so much that she felt that she was the reason for his passing. And I consoled her and informed her that according to our faith tradition, any person who dies from a pandemic, from a fire, from an earthquake, for any of those type of calamities, our belief tells us that that person goes straight into paradise without trial. So though she was seeing it as a bad thing that she had brought the virus to her home, I said that also got your father accepted into paradise without a trial. And she took some relief from that. And it also helped the rest of the family not to mourn and grieve over his passing. We're all going. We don't know when that day is, but we're not here forever. We try to work together and stay connected with each other. So we're appreciative of the technology that we're able to share with people who are not able to come physically to the mosque because of social distancing, the closeness that we normally have in prayer and hugging and greeting one another. That's something that's missed, but we understand we don't want to impact each other with something that could be of harm to them. So we have benefited greatly. We're continuing to learn from this experience. We understand that it too will pass. One of our doctors, medical doctors, shared with a group of imams on a conference call, a Zoom call, and he encouraged us to not give medical advice as leaders, because many times people come to you and they want medical advice, but we're not medical practitioners. So we advise them to consult with their physicians and ask God to help guide them to the right decisions. And it's been over, for the most part, it's been a great learning curve for us, because we have to reconnect with the sources of our faith, that is the Quran, the life of the prophet, and the wisdom that he shared with us from over 1,400 years ago. He told us that if there's a pandemic in your area, you shouldn't travel outside of that area. And if you know that there's a particular pandemic in a particular locale, you shouldn't visit there. So that was advice that was given over 1,400 years ago. It's still relevant today. We try to stay united, and what unites us is our heart and our faith, and our mind and our experiences may be different, but we hope that we can continue to learn from those experiences. And I'm going to stop my comments there. Again, thank you for allowing me to share. Our congregational meetings have gone from maybe 150 people to 20 or 25 people. And we are looking forward to the community opening up again. We're expecting that we can learn some vital lessons from this experience that will benefit us in the future.
Thank you,
Thank
Imam.
you so much. Godspeed. Assalamu alaikum.
Amen. Our next guest is the Right, not the retired, the Right Reverend Mark Hanley Andrus, the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of California. And I have to tell you, we have on the call, Bishop Mark, Wilma Batiste, who is one of our San Francisco Interfaith Council board members, and she has told us that the pandemic has given her an opportunity to go visit other communities of faith outside of her own. I remember you and I were both on hikes talking by telephone, and you shared with me the fact that online attendance seems to have risen, and in some cases giving. I know that you have a great responsibility for a number of parishes in the Episcopal Diocese of California. Would you share your personal as well as pastoral experiences with us and lessons learned?
Thank you so much, Michael. I want to add my gratitude to that expressed by the Rabbi and the Imam, and I know it's felt by all of us, for you and your colleague, Cynthia, and of course for the great Rita. We always put the honorifics in front of her name, but you deserve it as well, both of you. It's a joy to be in a city where we're bound together by love. It's really wonderful, and to have that organized with the Interfaith Council, it's just a blessing. Yeah, so just context, the Episcopal Diocese of California covers 5 counties in the Bay Area, a little bit of Santa Clara, but then San Mateo, San Francisco, Marin, Alameda, and Contra Costa. And it's 77 congregations of Episcopalians. Our cathedral is Grace Cathedral on Nob Hill. And I've been the bishop for this diocese of creative, wonderful people for 15 years now. So I'm going to share my screen and to give us a little bit of help in how we can look at what we've learned in the Episcopal Diocese of California during this time. So, there we go. We can believe in God and science at the same time. This is a window in Grace Cathedral. It's reputed to be the only window of Einstein in the world. It's way up in the clerestory. You wouldn't see it easily when you come into Grace Cathedral, and you can almost see the great equation E equals mc squared at the very bottom of the window. But just as the Imam said, there were so many beautiful things in what you said, Imam, about believing in the invisible and the earth being the mosque of the whole world being a mosque, and but also that we aren't being called as religious leaders to give medical advice, nor are we called to be the scientists. We in the Episcopal Church, in the Christian faith, we believe that there's one equation that's even greater than E equals mc squared, and that is God equals love. And that's where we live. But we're in a healthy relationship with science. We learn from science. The Anglican Church, the Church of England, and the Episcopal Church emerged with modern science, and so that has helped us have a relationship where we're respectful of and learning from. Many of our congregations formed, as the diocese did, a COVID-19 guidance team. And many of those had epidemiologists on the teams or consulting with them to help interpret. So my job and the core team job for the diocese was to interpret what the state was saying, what Governor Newsom's offices of public health were saying, what each of the 5 counties were saying, which were not always completely aligned. And then to say, what does that mean for people of faith in the Episcopal Diocese of California, to try to interpret to them how their worship, their service, and their pastoral care might reflect the guidance and the mandates of the counties across the Bay Area. We also wanted to be one. We wanted to be one Episcopal church across the diocese. So as far as possible, we interpreted the different counties in a way that would allow us to move forward together. Something else happened over this time that we've been in the pandemic, didn't it? And that is the rising tide of consciousness on race. And the Black Lives Matter movement really pushed this consciousness for all of us. And so the understanding of Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples' rights and the systemic racism that has infected our countries for its whole history is now not only so present in the minds of those who have been oppressed, but in the minds of people like me who are part of the dominant and dominating culture. In the Episcopal Church, there are a remarkable woman named Katrina Brown from Rhode Island, part of the DeWolf family, created a program called Sacred Ground Circles. It's a 10-part study group that moves through what is empire, what is white domination, what is structural racism, what are the origins of this, what is our place in it. Over 600 Episcopalians in the Diocese of California have taken part in the 10-part Sacred Ground Circles. And those have been deeply, deeply helped by the technical ability to join in groups together. I visited a church in San Mateo in person 2 weeks ago for an outdoor service, and a couple who are in their 90s told me after my sermon that had some aspects of race relations in it that they had taken part in a Sacred Ground Circle with 2 of the young Filipino women I confirmed, who are teenagers. So these 90-year-olds and these Filipino teenagers were in one Sacred Ground Circle together. So we've been in a process of learning and transformation that has been aided by the technology and are being pushed into the virtual during this time. We've made a commitment to protect the vulnerable and keep them in mind first. So you can see children being masked here and an elder being masked. This has been something that has been a guiding principle for us, to not be swayed by the fact that prosperous people, people who are in their middle years, who have gotten vaccinated, should lead the way and should guide the behavior of everyone, but rather that we should be guided by a concern for the most vulnerable. We're still wearing masks indoors. in our Episcopal congregations through the month of July. And while we've lifted the capacity requirements, people are singing in Grace Cathedral and all of our congregations, but we're still being cautious. And I want to say that my congregations, these 77 congregations, are even more cautious than I have been. Most of them, even though I permitted people to go back into the churches on Pentecost, and I was inside Grace Cathedral on Pentecost, most of our congregations continue to worship outdoors. They continue to live stream or use Zoom for their meetings. So I call what we've learned over this time the 3 C's: courage, compassion, and creativity. Not so much that we've learned, but it has been evidence, and it's really been inspiring to me to see how these 27,000 Episcopalians across the Bay Area have exhibited courage, compassion, and creativity in meeting the pandemic. In the area of our liturgy, I've really loved hearing the Rabbi and the Imam talk about requirements of how many people need to be together, and I like that idea of the community as defining. Christianity is an incarnational religion, and that kind of idea of the embodiment in a community is important to us as well. And we also think of the material world as conveying the presence of the divine. And so it's a requirement in our Book of Common Prayer that when we celebrate the sacrament of the Holy Communion, of the Eucharist, of the meal, the sacred meal, that the priest or the bishop holds or touches the bread or the wine. And this seems so minor, but our presiding bishop, the inspirational Michael Curry, and I in this diocese have held to this teaching. And so we've said we can't do blessing of bread and wine that you might have in your home across the internet. Somehow we've had to work on the liturgy in a creative way. So we went back to St. Augustine and his teaching on spiritual communion. And we developed prayers, and we took prayers from St. Augustine. And while we were in real lockdown, we blessed bread and wine on a holy table, and then encouraged people to welcome the fact, the loving fact of grace, that God is with us no matter what the circumstances are that prevent us, like Teilhard de Chardin when he was in the Mongolian desert, and as a Jesuit priest was unable to celebrate the Eucharist, not having bread or wine with him, but he prayed in that beautiful document he wrote, Mass on the World, that God would use him as the elements of the Mass when he didn't have the elements. So that's one area. In pastoral care, I've seen an amazing thing happen in terms of courage, creativity, and compassion. Vestries, our lay governing boards of our congregations, and their priests and their deacons have banded together to check in on every member of every congregation. It's been really remarkable. And then they've kept that up. They keep a rota of checking in on people pastorally during this time. And the very first thing that happened, before even people were concerned about their own flock, their own gathered community, or the liturgy, the courage, creativity, and compassion of our congregations was, how do we keep serving our neighborhoods and our communities? How do we keep our food banks open? How do we keep all of the social services that come out of our congregations going? One church here in San Francisco, they called me to complain that I was preventing people over 65 from being in person to give out food. They said, we're committed to this. We've been doing this for decades. And a group of people under 40 came forward and said, my dear elders, we will step in for you. We should have been doing this all along, and we'll serve the food. We'll give out the bags of groceries. And when it's safe, you take over again as you wish. It was really, really beautiful. So in many ways, we've seen the courage, compassion, and creativity, and we do believe we have been changed. All the worship that's going to be going on from now on, for instance, is going to be hybrid worship. We've welcomed many more people, as Michael said. than we maybe had in the past. We were being joined by people in other countries, in other states, in other areas, and they're finding grace and community in ways that they hadn't before. We need to keep offering that. So we'll have in-person worship and we'll have virtual worship too. And we're going to be changed in other ways as well. So thank you so much for letting me speak with you this morning.
Thank you so much, Bishop Mark. What a perfect segue to welcome the Most Reverend Salvatore Leone, the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. Your Excellency, I know that you've had a number of unique challenges. I know that for the Archdiocese and the Catholic Church, that the centrality of the sacraments is important. As well, you are ministering to people for whom English is not a first language, and I know that your geography, like Bishop Andrews's and Metropolitan Yerasimos's and Stacy's, Reverend Currents, goes beyond the 7x7 boundaries of San Francisco. Would you share with us the challenges and also the triumphs that you've experienced over the last 16 months?
Great. Well, thank you, Michael, and allow me to take the opportunity to add my own words of thanks to you, to Rita, all the leadership of the Interfaith Council, and for calling us together for this very necessary. I'm so happy you recognize the necessity for us to kind of reflect over this very unique experience of the last year and a half. So this is a wonderful opportunity. Yes, we do have our own unique challenges. Being a sacramental church, the physical reality matters. What is tangible, what is visible. And as Bishop Andrews was mentioning about Holy Communion, it's similar for us. It's really the core of who we are. And it's not really possible to live stream the sacraments. So when the pandemic first began, I did ask the parishes they had to close the doors, but to live stream the services. So my jurisdiction is over the 3 counties on the west side of the bay, San Francisco, San Mateo, and Marin. We have 90 parishes, parish communities, and about 50 schools and other Catholic institutions. Yes, we are very diverse. Of course, the city to a large extent was built up by immigrants from Ireland and Italy. We have descendants of those Irish and Italian immigrants. Also, some early on coming from France and from Germany as well. More recently, well, for a long time, immigrants from Mexico, Central America. So yes, we do have a very large Spanish-speaking population here. We have a very large and very vibrant and active Filipino population, other parts of Asia as well, Korea and Vietnam in particular. So it's quite a vibrantly diverse population. It's also diverse in terms of sort of on social issues and political opinions, which posed another challenge to me in terms of how do we accommodate our need for being a sacramental church at a time when we can't have people come to church for Mass. So there were some who were pushing to justify the health order, and others who wanted to be extra cautious. So I'm very grateful that we had a theological institute in Washington, D.C. put together a panel of experts to study this. So they had liturgists and theologians, but also healthcare experts to figure out a way we can celebrate our Mass safely. And so they came up with some suggestions for safety protocols that have been proven to be very effective. So as we were going through the pandemic, we were, again, I encouraged the pastors to live stream and to preach. So even if their people could not be physically present, that they could at least see their pastor celebrating the Mass and hear them preach and have some sense of being connected to that. We did, to pick up on what Bishop Andrews said, that idea of the spiritual communion. We put a prayer up on the screen at the communion time so people could make that prayer for a spiritual communion. I myself, in addition to Sunday, which is our Christian Sabbath, we have a Mass for every day of the week. So I started celebrating a Mass every day at the cathedral that was live streamed and preached, so I could somehow stay connected to my people. And that went on for a few months. Then the pastors, I was very pleased with how creative some of our pastors became. In addition to the live streaming of the Mass, they would conduct faith sharing gatherings, Bible studies by Zoom. They found ways to stay in touch with their people. Some pastors just did the old fashioned, called their parishioners up on the phone, speak to them and give them some encouragement. I think one sign of the effectiveness of this, not to be too mercenary, but we found that the parishes that stayed very active like this and engaged with their people did not see a significant decrease in the collections. So they managed financially to survive through the pandemic. So that's a lesson learned for me, is, well, more of a confirmation of something that we kind of already know, right? That when our leaders are pastorally engaged and present, as was said earlier about leadership meaning being present, people respond and it builds up the faith community. And even as I was trying to advocate for easing up on some of the restrictions, I made it very clear that we had to do it safely and we had to observe safety protocols. Now we're very grateful that as we're beginning to open up, we can ease up on those. We do have our own safety protocols as well. They're a little less restrictive, but still with masking and some social distancing and so forth. So another lesson learned is, despite these kind of differences of opinion that I was being pressured on one side or the other, I did find there was a universal desire for people to come together and worship, no matter where they stand on different issues. So I think that's in our nature as people of faith, to gather together and share our faith with others. We, in our faith tradition, it's an obligation to attend the Sunday service. We dispensed that up until recently because of the pandemic. And I often told my people that it's kind of a good test of where they're at with their faith because of this dispensation, no longer an obligation to go to Sunday service. Is it something that they're disappointed that they can't go to church, partake of the sacraments and share faith with their fellow believers? Or is it a relief that they don't have to go to church? So I'd say that's a good measure where one is at with their faith. But I do see on the part of many this very great happiness to be able to return together in person worship.
Thank you so very much. And we are grateful for your presence here today, Your Excellency. Our next guest is Reverend Stacy Curran, the District Superintendent for the California-Nevada Conference of the United Methodist Church of the Bay District. I had the very unique privilege with Rita Semel of attending Stacy's installation at Jones United Methodist Church 14 years ago. You're muted, Stacy. Sorry.
Thank you. It was probably longer than that, but it seems about right. Let's just leave it at 14.
We are grateful for your presence today, and like Bishop Andrus and the Archbishop, you cover a geography. Can you tell us a little bit about those that you are ministering to and how they made it through the pandemic and how you made it through the pandemic?
Sure. Thank you so much, Michael. I remember that first day at Jones. And just seeing your smiling face and Rita's beautiful beaming face there, and being the first people who welcomed me to the city of San Francisco was something I'll never forget. And all of our churches are grateful for the witness and the ministry of SFIC. So thank you so much. It's humbling to be on with this group of such esteemed leaders. And I just want to say that I'm hearing a lot of what has already been said and really resonating with it, seeing how we are very much aligned, very much the same in what we've been dealing with. My district is the Bay District. We represent churches in San Francisco County, Marin County, San Mateo County, Alameda County, and all of the Methodist churches, United Methodist churches in that area. And like the Archbishop said, we are very, very diverse. We have many congregations that are non-English speaking as their first language. And diverse and diversity includes Filipino, Tongan, Fijian, Korean, Cambodian, Vietnamese, African American. I mean, we're just a very, very fortunate to have the rich diversity. And during the pandemic, we were really aligned with our a founder of the Methodist movement, John Wesley, the 3 rules of Methodism, and that is to do good, do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. And so the do no harm piece, that really looked like when things were shifting last March, watching the science, being in consultation with epidemiologists, and had a core group looking at the whole science aspect of it, and making the tough decision that to do no harm really meant to close our churches, to keep people safe against this virus that we had no idea what it was going to end up being. And so in that effort to do no harm and to preserve life, we had to be intentional about interpreting it into communities that don't speak English, when most of the literature about this virus were in English, and communities that have a different cultural context around meeting and the importance of gathering in person. But we were able to do the amazing. I just say God's grace is amazing. Many of our churches have been talking about going online for years, having a digital presence for years, digital giving platforms for years. And within 10 days, every single church was able to pivot and get something online to be able to minister and to reach their people and people beyond their local congregations within 10 days. So that was one of the really wonderful things that we saw. The learnings was that things that we think are impossible, and we think, oh, we'll have to do that someday. We don't have the equipment. We don't have this. We don't have that. When we really needed to do it, to be able to reach the people God has sent us, we were able to pivot within 10 days. And now every single church in the Bay District has an online digital presence. And I think it was Reverend Andrus that said, what we do going forward will be a both and. We will have a hybrid worship. We'll have in person, and we'll also have offerings on Zoom. Our Bible studies and small groups have grown, become more well attended. People from outside of the area have been able to, we have people from Germany and New Zealand and all over the United States being able to attend worship with our congregations because of this, and are able to be discipled through the small groups on Zoom. And as a matter of fact, some people, especially the over 60 crowd, really loves the Zoom small groups, and they don't want to stop. Many of them don't want to stop. And so we're figuring out ways to do what we call both in person, knowing that physical community is so important, but also realizing that some of the gifts of this horrible pandemic have been, we've learned to do things in a different way. We've also learned that we are very deeply committed to caring for our neighbors. And that is one thing that I'm especially proud of, is that not only did our churches continue to do their food pantries, their meal services, and all of the wonderful things that we've been doing to care for the least of these, is that we have a significant amount of churches that started new ministries to those who are hurting in the midst of the pandemic. They started new things. So that makes me especially proud. So we have learned that we can do hard things, we can do new things, and that God's grace is amazing and it is sufficient. And we are hopeful about the future, hopeful about what we will do next on this path. We realize it won't look like it was before, but it might be even better than it was before. And so just an abundant amount of gratitude for our churches and our laity who have weathered this storm with grace and love and compassion. And again, that third principle, staying in love with God, we've been able to deepen our relationship with God and with one another. So I won't talk any longer. I'm mindful of the time, but I do appreciate being able to share what we've learned and to hear so many rich learnings from the other esteemed colleagues. So thank you, Michael.
Amen, Reverend Stacy. Thank you. Our final guest is someone that I have known longer than anyone on this program, since the 1980s when I was in seminary. And he was the archdeacon at that time to Archbishop Iacobus of blessed memory. And he also can claim the largest geographic territory of anyone on this program, the entire West Coast. And I find myself coming back to him often in our many conversations throughout the pandemic, realizing that I see things myopically through the lens of the 7x7 here in San Francisco. And he has to deal with the pressures of so many of the Western United States. Your Eminence, Metropolitan Gerasimos, we welcome you from the Greek Orthodox metropolis of San Francisco, whose offices are on Valencia Street. You see the beautiful cathedral being built there. But Your Eminence, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for the many beautiful conversations we've had throughout the pandemic.
Michael, thank you so much for having me here today amongst this very, very august body of faith leaders. Do you want me to give you the 3 minutes version or the 15 minutes version? Which one do you want?
The floor is yours.
I want to thank you, first of all, you and the Interfaith Council, especially Rita Semel, for all the great opportunities that you have given us to put ourselves together. And I mean literally put ourselves together as faith people who are faithing in many different ways. So thank you, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. The short version, what we learn as Greek Orthodox, before I go into who we are, what we learn first. We learn how to move very fast. We can take care of those in need. We can connect in ways never before thought possible. We can look beyond our own needs for answers. We can be nimble and responsive. We can be resilient. We can adapt. We can challenge our own paradigms, like the Greek festivals, live streaming worship, digital general assemblies and parish council meetings, Bible studies, and online giving. People do respond to the purposeful need if they are asked. And finally, if the parish, because we're talking about the parishes, was a pre-COVID healthy parish, it remained healthy. If not, it exposed all the wounds. Now, having said that, let me just say a few words about the challenges that I have personally and the people who work with me. The Greek Orthodox metropolis of San Francisco, as you said, Michael, encompasses 67 parishes in 7 states. That is a rather abnormal way of managing a corporation, nevertheless, a church, a body of Christ. Each county and each municipality had their own guidelines through this kind of 15 months now. It was very difficult for us to develop a one-size-fits-all approach. But we worked towards the direction to create a consistent message, and one that provided for the safety and well-being of our faithful as well as for our clergy. We recognized that most of what is being discussed is the practical effects of the pandemic on religious life. We all had to adapt in practical ways, and my esteemed colleagues, the ones that they spoke before me, all of them underline that necessity to make our faithful engaged in somehow. We also need to think now theologically about these developments, how technology has affected our theology. Everything from the theological reasons we offered to our people to justify our policies during the pandemic, to encourage them to participate in digital worship and other things. Whether it was the teaching about the church at home, η κατοίκον εκκλησία, to the idea that everyone is living like an anchorite away from people and others. That being the case, the old adage, we fashion our tools and our tools refashion us, are at work here. A writer and scholar by the name of Heidi Campbell, she noted in one of her work, despite all the talk we give to building up the body of Christ, the pandemic exposed the churches as, quote, worship delivering services. We have not wrestled with how the pandemic has affected our understanding of worship and ecclesiology, especially from a community-centered gathering to a privatized experience. What does it mean to be the church when people have only gathered together in a virtual space? It has a different meaning for us.
Yeah.
Our faithful were not able to attend church in person worship for many months now,
Some cool water.
which also severely limited their access to the sacraments. Bishop Andrews and His Excellency the Archbishop underline the sacramentality of our faith. Holy Communion and confession, it's a necessity for us to realize. The Orthodox Church relies on all the senses during worship. And when it comes to a dimensional watching services online, it truly distracts from the immersive experiences of true worship. One of the questions that you posed, Michael, was what kind of decision-making process I use to navigate the pandemic. Given the broad geography of our metropolis, it is hard to be personally connected, even at a social distance. While I have always been in communication with our clergy and faithful through written communication, I transitioned this to regular video messages, which I am continuing to do this day. We also implemented weekly Zoom meetings with our priests, which became valuable as a means of sharing resources, frustrations, concerns, solutions, and most importantly, strengthening our bonds as members of the ecclesial body. Moments that are significant for us as Greek Orthodox in the West Coast. What do? We form various committees that responded to the needs of the COVID pandemic. We have been met weekly in different teams for the last 62 weeks. And that shows the interest of the people to be engaged, the thirst of the people to be in touch. One thing that I recall is that early on, we thought that we would be back in our churches after closing for a few weeks. The reality set in, and especially in the weeks and months passed by. One other significant memory I have is when I would hear my priests speak about those in their communities who were suffering and dying from COVID. Many of them were alone. Our clergy were restricted from visiting. This is an antithesis of who we are as ministers to our flock. Stacy made a wonderful statement on this issue, and I want to underline it, about do no harm and do good and love. I believe we have been changed by this experience, and not just those of us in ministry, but our entire world. We think because of all the technological and medical advancements that the pandemic was something that happened in the old days. That is, until we were confronted by it. We must never take for granted the freedoms we enjoy to worship, to go to the store, to movies, to a museum, and many other places. We also need to be grateful for the health and do more to for ourselves and those around us. One lesson that I personally received from this experience so far is that we can get by with much more simplistic life than we thought. We became sensitized. I also hope that for our families, they realize that Sunday mornings should remain a time for worship and not revert to sports leagues and other extracurricular events that distract families from worship. We also became sensitized about our faith to the point that we experienced during this time more intensely the responsibilities that we have as stewards of God's creation. Before COVID, we were anthropocentric and egocentric. And the pandemic gave us the possibility, the pause on that philosophy of life and shifted our focus from the created to the creator. These are my thoughts, Michael. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to respond to that.
Your Eminence, thank you. And there was one other lesson, though, that I think you learned that you have shared with your flock. And if you will permit me and indulge me just a moment, my family was very blessed that His Eminence officiated at the wedding of my son and my new beautiful daughter-in-law. And in his comments to the couple afterwards, they were really comments to all of us. He spoke about the precautions of the pandemic and how, in fact, they were not just for ourselves, but because of our love for one another. And I think that if the pandemic has taught us anything, Your Eminence, it has been that the importance of caring for one another, as you so eloquently gave these guiding words to this newlywed young couple as they begin their life together. So on a very personal note, I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for your leadership of the Greek Orthodox metropolis of San Francisco.
Thank you, Michael.
To all of our presenters today, Rabbi Dan Ayne, Imam Abu Khadir Al-Amin, the Right Reverend Dr. Mark Hanley Andrus, the Most Reverend Salvatore Leone, Archbishop of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, and Reverend Stacy Current, and His Eminence Metropolitan Yerasimos. I want to thank you. This has been a rich conversation. In each of your comments, you've alluded to the new normal. I'm going to ask us a great favor. And once you've experienced the new normal, please come back and tell us how you have adjusted and the triumphs and the challenges. That concludes today's program. We invite you to come back on the 8th of July, at which time we will hear a presentation at 8:30 on to mask or not to mask in this new normal. We are very grateful that Hafisa Salabai, who has been part of the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach Team, will be leading us in that conversation. And it is it will address masking post CDC guidelines. So thank you all. This concludes our program today. And again, thank you to all of our presenters. God bless you, and thank you for everything you're doing for our community. Also want to thank Tova Green from the San Francisco Zen Center, and of course, our own Rita Semel. God bless you all.